Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Welcome to episode number 3 of the Mother Wit podcast. Oh, and a gentle reminder that nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your healthcare. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Today I have with me Kim Weiss-Lewit. She is one of my absolute favorite IBCLCs. So for those of you who don't know what that acronym is, an IBCLC is an International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. In addition to being an awesome lactation consultant, she is also many other things. She is a volunteer for the La Leche League. She has extensive yoga training. She has worked in prisons, helping pregnant people who need help with parenting. She's taught yoga in prisons. She has advanced training in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders from both the Cellini Institute and Postpartum Support International. She is like one of those people that kind of can do it all and do it well, which not many of us can say. Kim, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you for having me.
Is there anything else that you're up to these days that I did not just allude to?
No, I think that's it. It's been interesting because I think maybe for a lot of people the last 2 years, my world has gotten so much smaller in a way. And I am, almost all of my work right now is as a lactation consultant. And when you said all those other things, I was like, oh, I miss all those other things. So I'm thinking as, hopefully things are shifting. I can be doing, a more of a variety of things again, because that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that because of course now I'm going to be a total Debbie Downer and say you're saying that right as we're kind of dealing with this Omicron. Oh, I cannot say that word. I'm one of those people who can't say it.
Right. Me too.
And so, yeah, just as I think we all think that life is about to change, we get wind of the fact that maybe we're going to have to make our world smaller yet again.
Right.
For me, I got pretty comfortable with the small world, although I would be happy for it to open back up. How are you feeling about it all?
Yeah, I think for myself, maybe personally and professionally, I've adjusted to this smaller world. I was living in New Jersey in the beginning of the pandemic, right outside New York City. And I was, always going to different places and seeing different people and had a very big sort of social circle and professional circle. And I'm now living in Vermont and my, social circle is much, much, much smaller. And like I said, my work has gotten really laser focused on lactation support. So I'm actually at peace with that. I'm at peace with where things are. I think for my kids as a parent, I'm wanting as much normalcy as possible, which I know a lot of us are feeling that way. I got to watch my daughter's dance class and, everyone's wearing a mask, but I got to sit there and watch and it was like, oh, this is so nice. I couldn't do this for so long, So, yeah. So I guess I'm holding both things. I'm hoping for more normalcy for our kids, but I'm also comfortable with the shifts that my career has taken and my life has taken right now.
Yeah. So one of the things I actually wanted to ask you as we get started, because, I've known all of these things about you for a long time, your long resume. But what I realized as I was reading through it in preparation for this session today was that I didn't actually know what came first, second, third, etc. I would love it if you would just take us through how you got from point A to point B. What came first? What got added on? Because, having only recently recorded my first episode, which those of you tuning in for the first time, you might want to go back and check out that first episode because I think it really sets the stage for who I am and what I'm trying to do here. But it made me actually think about you in a similar way. Like if you were going to do a solo intro episode,
Mhm.
how would you tell this story about yourself?
Oh, it's a good question. Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes think about becoming a lactation consultant, becoming an IBCLC. Not everyone realizes that while it's not really as much of a traditional educational path as maybe becoming a nurse midwife, which is, there's lots and lots of universities that have very, very concrete programs. Becoming an IBCLC is like a little bit more, you got to kind of piece it together. You need lots and lots of clinical hours. I don't even remember how many because I ended up with like 3 times as many as I needed by the time I got there. And you need lots and lots of, college level science credits, which I had a few, and then I had to get more. Then you need a lot of lactation specific information and education before you take this board certification exam. So for me, I became an IBCLC probably, more than 10 years after I started working with new families. So there was a lot of time before I kind of landed where I am. I went to school for theater, which I think you did too, from your first podcast. I think you were like a theater kid. Is that right?
That is absolutely true. I went to Performing Arts High School in South Florida, and me and all my friends moved to New York City together, or some moved to LA, but that's basically what happened to my crew.
Yeah. So I think I was like, oh, this is why Tanya and I are getting along so well. We're theater
Dude,
kids. This makes
I
perfect
know
sense.
so many midwives and other birth professionals who have like movement in their body and in their bones from their childhood and onward, or theater. And it's all so interesting to me how many people I know who that's their background.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. So my undergrad degree is in theater. And then I graduated and I was like, oh, I'm going to do this theater thing, right? I was doing like, trying to do things in New York City, the whole same as you. Um, I had this, I was in this show that it was really lovely. And it was this off Broadway show. And it was like getting some like positive, momentum. We had to write up in Time Out New York. And it seemed like, oh, this is the beginning of something, and I had this feeling that, at 20 something, I really said to myself, am I going to keep going in this direction? Is this really what I want? Or do I need to go in a different direction? And I remember like sitting on the subway one day coming home from the show. And I remember just thinking like, I think there's something else for me. I don't know exactly what it is, but, I'd been kind of moving in this direction for so long, but I don't know if this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I mean, I loved it. I loved performing, but I wasn't quite sure. And so, I ended up moving at some point to New Haven, Connecticut. I'm from there. I'm from West Haven. So I moved to New Haven, and I always jogged by this children's mental health clinic. And one day I just stopped in, pre-COVID, we just stop in places. And I just was like, how can I help here? I want to help out here. So I ended up, long story short, I ended up volunteering and getting a job there as a family advocate. I was working with families who were affected by domestic abuse and sexual abuse. And I worked there for, a good year. And I said, okay, this is where I need to be. This is the space I want to be in. I think I want to be a therapist. The director of our clinic was a drama therapist named Alice Forrester. She was amazing, is amazing. And she kind of encouraged me to go toward drama therapy. And I was like, cool, this is amazing. So I got into NYU and I started my master's in drama therapy, creative arts therapy. And I got married, I think right before or somewhere in there. And I got pregnant. So, my first year was like, hit the books, like a million classes, want to get straight A's. I was just like my normal driven student. And then that summer, I was insanely pregnant, like taking all of these summer classes, sleeping on like the couch in between classes because I was so tired, just trying to get as many credits in as I could so I could, keep moving toward graduation. But, it all worked out. I ended up having my daughter, Sky. Took a semester off, I think, and then slowly, very slowly worked through my master's degree. But what happened, in that process, of course, was that I was, in grad school to be a creative arts therapist. I was pregnant myself, going through all of the physical, emotional, spiritual transformation that is, becoming a mother, having this little tiny newborn, figuring out my identity again. And I just said, like, this is the space I want to work in. I want to work with pregnant people. I want to work with new parents. This really resonates with me. I did my master's thesis on birth stories. And then I graduated right around the time I had my second kid, who's now 13. And at the time, to be a creative arts therapist in the state of New York, they kind of like just changed the rule. You had to, get your full-time hours. You had like a year to get the hours to get the license. And maybe you could apply for 2 years, but it was like really strict. And I was like, I have these like two babies. Like, I don't think I can do that right now. So instead of like everyone I graduated with jumped right into their first jobs to get their hours for licensure, and I sort of hung back a little bit. I became a La Leche League leader in that time. So I was like, helping lead meetings and doing support calls and helping people with their breastfeeding and, questions and challenges. I started teaching yoga during that time. So in other words, in some ways, like motherhood kind of gave me this space to say like, hey, maybe my path is going to look a little different than my peers, and that's okay. And you were kind of talking about that in the first podcast. You were like, not that like having the job is wrong, but like, there's all different ways to go in this work. So I did that. I taught yoga. I taught prenatal yoga a lot. La Leche League leader. I, through grad school, actually got involved with prison work. One of my internships was in two different women's prisons, one men's prison. And so it kind of like my world kind of weaved through this combination of like some paid work and volunteer work and parenting. And it wasn't until my third kid, Ruby, who's now almost 10, until she was, 1 or so, that I realized, okay, I want to do more. Like, I've kind of been piecing this together. I want to do something more. And I want to be a doula. I want to be a birth doula. And I went to birth doula training. She was about 2. And I thought, okay, no one's going to hire me. Like, I'm never going to be able to do this. And I went to teach a prenatal yoga class. And afterwards, 2 of the women were like, oh, we heard you were at birth doula training. That's why you weren't here last week. Will you be our doula? And so like very quickly, I was thrust into the birth doula world. And I did that for, I don't even know anymore, a good many years, pretty much full-time, New Jersey, New York City. Was so honored to be with so many people as they work, live through their pregnancies and postpartum, but also like was there at their births. It was such a powerful and profound experience in my life. And, it wasn't until, I did that for quite a while. On-call life is hard, as you well know. And I really loved the lactation side of things. I really loved being there for them, that I said, you know what, it's time. I'm going to really dive into learning more about how I can be a lactation consultant and have that be my primary focus. So I did all of the extra science classes that I didn't have from undergrad and grad school, which was a lot, and they were really hard. And I did my lactation specific education that I had to have for the exam. And I got a job at our local hospital, Hoboken Hospital. And I worked there for a year. I didn't actually need those hours because I had so many La Leche League hours, but it was so invaluable to have that hospital experience. And I think any IBCLC, if you can, even though you don't need to necessarily work in a hospital to become one, I think it's so important to just see lots and lots of newborns and lots of early nursing. So I did that for a year. I got pregnant with my 4th, very intentionally, actually, and left the hospital behind. And then a few months after she was born is when COVID hit. So I was, in COVID early postpartum too. And that's sort of where I kind of shifted into providing a lot of virtual care. And I think that's something we're going to talk about today. But man, that was a long story. I hope that wasn't too long.
Oh, Kim, you had me. So I hope our listeners feel similarly. I could have just listened to you go on because it was such a journey. I felt like I was on that journey with you. And I think I feel it more also because your journey and mine have some parallels. There are many things that are not the same, right? Like I only have 1 kid and you have 4.
Yeah.
There are some differences here, but nonetheless, I feel like I understand how one thing rolls into another. And I think, for me, it's been such a journey, and I think I'm finally starting to reflect on the journey.
Yeah.
Because, I've like really come up for air, and something about deciding to step back and do this podcast has made me reflect in a way that I usually am just kind of like so type A and go, 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 and I don't let myself reflect. So it's been nice to reflect, and it's nice to sit back and listen to you reflect as somebody who I so thoroughly enjoy working with. And yes, we're going to talk more about virtual care because that is the kind of thing you and I have done together over these past couple of years. But I want to highlight a couple things that Kim said for our listeners, because Kim said it, but I want to drive the point home so people understand. Becoming an IBCLC is actually really hard. Like this isn't a little easy certification, and not dissing doulas at all, but just to create a frame of reference here. Becoming a doula is like a 3-day workshop. You attend some births, you write some papers, you read some books, and it comes pretty easy, right? The word certification just doesn't hold enough weight when you think about how different something can be in the world, right? Like
Mhm.
my pregnancy and postpartum athleticism certification that I value immensely, I took an open book exam,
Right.
right? Like at the end of the day, that's really different than what Kim did to become an IBCLC. And when somebody becomes an IBCLC who is not already a registered nurse or a midwife, they have a tough road. They have to take a lot of coursework that we become exempt from because where we come into the equation. So I really admire IBCLCs who come into this who weren't already nurses. And I think there's a reason why that nurses become IBCLCs because that path is a little bit more straightforward and easier. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good point. My very good friend Erica Charpentier, she's an amazing IBCLC, and her and I were allegedly leaders at the exact same time. Our kids are all the same age, except she has 3 and I have 4. But we became allegedly leaders at the same time, and she just kept going right into IBCLC. She's been in IBCLC like 10 years longer than me, and I always kind of think like, wow, I took a really windy, long path. And I'm sort of like amazed that she like dove right in because I was so overwhelmed, honestly, with the process. Once I was like, oh, I'll be a lactation consultant. I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so much on top of what I've already done education wise, you know? So it took me a long time to really dive in to all that additional work and coursework and exam prep and everything.
So I have known Erica for many years, and I actually wrote her name down the other day because I've been out of touch with her for many, many years. But I actually want to get in touch with her and see if she'll chat with me on the podcast. So I'm glad you mentioned her name.
Goodness, I'm sure she will. And that just tells your listeners that this is a small and beautiful world of birth workers. It really is. And not that we all know each other, but that you could do 6 degrees of separation very easily in our world, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, the other point I wanted to make as you were talking is, and I have to tread lightly here because I don't want to say anything hurtful. I don't mean to say anything hurtful if I do, and hopefully you'll rein me in and help me out or dig me out of my hole if I do. But you talked about something that I really want to push you on because I kind of feel a little opposite. And I want you to unpack that for me because I have a feeling you're going to make something clearer to me or give me a better or more balanced perspective, I should say. So
Okay.
what you said was you encouraged people who are becoming IBCLCs to work in a hospital for a while. And while I don't think that there's anything wrong with recommending that, what you brought up for me is that I haven't always seen the best breastfeeding support come out of hospital-based help, and that includes IBCLCs. And I know that a big piece of that is as systemic as everything else that I've already been talking about on this podcast and will continue to talk about. But I wonder if you can add in some layers because I think I'm tackling that extremely superficially.
Oh yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I have, especially when the pandemic hit and I had already left the position because I was having my little one. But I had some like survivor guilt because, hospital lactation work and hospital workers in general is such a more stressful way to do the work than the way that I get to do it in private practice. So, especially in the beginning, I was, talking with Carmen Baker, who was my mentor and worked with me at the hospital. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's like in there in the trenches, not only with COVID, but just with all the stress and all of the things that come with working in a hospital out, as opposed to just in private practice. So I just kind of want to like say that to begin with, that I have so much respect for people working in hospitals and IBCLCs working in hospitals. That being said, the system is not designed to necessarily support IBCLCs, and the system is not designed to necessarily support families in their feeding goals the way that you and I would like to see it. So I guess what I'm saying to your question about my assertion that I would think that it's great if IBCLCs can work in a hospital, I think that the experience gained there is just the sheer volume, if you will, of babies and dyads that I got to work with. I don't know that I would have had that opportunity in a non-hospital setting, maybe like in a clinic setting. Yeah. But I think that was super helpful for me as a professional. But I also, did have this opportunity to feel like I was maybe bringing a different Now I want to make sure that I don't dig myself into a hole. That I'm bringing a different perspective of someone that was a long-term birth doula and was becoming an IBCLC. I'm bringing a different perspective than maybe somebody who is coming from, maybe they're coming from a nursing background and they went and got their IBCLC or their CLC. Maybe I'm coming from a slightly different lens in terms of how I provide care, or the kind of the ideas about being a doula is all about empowering the family, right? And empowering their choices and listening to them, and really guiding them to find what works best for them. And I think sometimes other providers might be coming from a more kind of expert top down. I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I'm always thinking about coming from underneath a family and lifting them up and supporting them. Even though I have maybe, expertise, I don't want to come in as kind of over and above as the expert. I don't know. Did I dig myself into a hole?
No, I don't think you did. I think you are trying to explain your perspective. And I think I hear you. And what came up for me in listening to you is there are parallels to be made here. And of course, none of these will be perfect parallels. But I think coming from where you came from into being a hospital-based IBCLC is a little like somebody who has home birth experience as a midwife and then steps into the hospital setting. You're always going to have that different perspective, and it's going to ooze out of your pores differently, right?
Exactly. No, that's all. I was just going to say exactly. And I think it's also some of his personality, right? Like maybe it goes back to the theater training, or the fact that I wanted to do theater in the first place. Like there is maybe a slightly, I think of things more intuitively and more creatively than some of my colleagues that might think of things, the math side of it was always like, I had to like really get my head around the math of being a lactation consultant. I didn't come to it from like a very mathematical, strictly scientific brain. That's the part I had to work on. The part where you go and you connect with someone and you make them feel loved and cared for, like that's the part that came easier for me,
Yeah. I think the analogy of the home birth midwife really helped me kind of just understand what you were saying. I also think that, again, back to the systemic issues, a hospital-based IBCLC has to see a lot of people on a day where maybe a bunch of babies were born, and they simply don't have time to get to all the things. So the next parallel to be made is, so when I talk about like a doctor who has his or her hand on the doorknob while they ask you a question, you already feel shut down. So when they know they have to get on to the next person, that's where things go awry. And that's not necessarily their fault, it's the system's fault. But the most concrete example I see of this that you and I have talked about before is the overuse of nipple shields. Right? Like I feel like all my patients come home with a nipple shield from the hospital, and then I am in the position to slowly wean them off of that nipple shield. And I know you get that. And so that becomes this, again, concrete example of where we are failing people, because I know a nipple shield has wonderful uses, but it should not be used as often, just like a C-section should not be used as often as it is. All the parallels,
Yeah. It's an intervention mindset, right? As opposed to coming from a place of, one of the things I was thinking about today, actually, I was seeing clients before this podcast, is I was thinking about how important it is for me as a lactation consultant to not pathologize things that are normal, and try to hold sort of like what is normal, what is expected, what is common, and then really, go to the intervention when the intervention is warranted, but not go to the intervention first,
Yes. Yeah. And I think their hands are tied in these situations. And then to layer on to that, and then I think we can move on. But the final layer is, at some point, at first we blame the system, and then people, I've been this person, and I say this all the time so that I can hopefully make this sound more gentle. At some point we embody what has become robotic for us. And then we're not thinking or feeling anymore. And that's where things get tricky. Right?
Yeah. And I think you're going back to the idea of connection, and that I think all care, especially, it's all care, but especially around pregnancy and birth and postpartum, I think the best care always comes from connection. And connection takes time, and it takes emotional availability and energy. And it's hard to connect if you're burnt out or overworked and all these things that easily happen in a hospital setting.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Oh my goodness. All right. All right. I want to move into the topic that I was actually really wanting to talk to you about. And this is, of course, it's going to be great fun for me to talk to you about this, but it's like you and I being on our soapboxes and talking about something that we both love. But I wanted to talk about this for our audience because I think that there are a lot of viewpoints on virtual care. And of course, we're going to talk about virtual care as I am a midwife providing virtual care, and Kim is a lactation consultant providing virtual care. But I think some of these things will apply to every practitioner who has found themselves providing virtual care. And what I have seen is that, again, there are providers who are doing it as a matter of course because the world has opened this door and that cannot be closed. But people I adore have said to me, ugh, I really don't like it. I don't feel I can connect with my clients. Also, in other cases, people are still seeing a really busy panel of patients, so 30, 40 people. So it's not going to feel any different than an in-person visit. So there are layers to what can create a good or bad virtual visit. So my first question for you is, pre-pandemic, how much virtual care had you provided, and what were your thoughts and feelings about virtual care?
Zero. I think the answer is actual zero. I mean, the piece that I had done virtually, if you will, I don't know if it's quite virtually, but I was always, again, coming from being a birth doula before I was a lactation consultant, I really structured my private practice on this idea of being available. And I know that a lot of my IBCLC colleagues would disagree with me on this. Like, you see the client, you end the visit, you have exactly 2 weeks of follow-up. This is what it looks like. You only communicate with me in the portal. Like, whatever they've set up, I fully respect their boundaries and that works for them and their practice. For me, what's always worked well for me is a little bit more of a doula approach. Like, I'm available to you. Like, so even in between lactation consults with people, we were texting, calling, answering emails. I was trying to have that sort of open availability because as soon as I leave a consult, this is before, I was doing virtually, everything changes. I give them a care plan that, maybe changes exactly what they were doing. And I need to know, like, is that working? Is that not working? How do you feel about it? So I never provided a virtual lactation consult to anyone, I don't think, before the pandemic. Not that I can remember, but I was sort of used to having this kind of open communication with my clients in between visits.
Okay, so 2 thoughts on that. One is, damn, you're good. Like, damn, you're good at virtual care. I have sent you clients. I'm like totally going to brag on Kim now. I have sent Kim clients who have seen 3 lactation consultants in person. And I'm in my client's ear saying, I have someone I think can help. And then finally they say, out of desperation, fine, I'll see her. And then Kim helps, like, virtually. It's impressive. And so the fact that you weren't doing it before is kind of mind-blowing to me. It's really something. I'm so impressed with your ability.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very nice of you. I have a thought on what you just said, but I'll let you say the second thing first. That was very kind of you.
Well, secondly, when you talk about, like, I love how you were a little on the fence about how to say whether you've ever engaged in virtual care because you were actually talking about the very intense ongoing communication. I realize that that's the other reason that you and I work so well when we share clients, because I do the same thing. I am, as a virtual midwife, so all in and so all there. And in episode 2, for our listeners who have already heard it, you'll hear my guest, Sarah Lesko, who was a former client of mine, say she would ask me a question and she was shocked that I pretty much immediately answered always. And you could take a poll of all my clients and they will all tell you the same thing. The only time I don't answer right away is if I'm in session with another client recording a podcast or whatever it is that makes me unable to do so. But otherwise, I'm very prompt, and it's my midwife core and gut, just like it's your doula core and gut that makes you be that available. And it's not just about being available. It's about being fully present for what that person is experiencing when the whole world is sending them a message that their question or concern is too small to matter.
Yes. Yeah. And what you had me thinking about when you were talking, the first one is, like, it was very nice of you to say that I'm good at what I'm doing. The thing is that I when the pandemic happened, I had sort of a little bit a little bit desperate, a little bit driven. I don't know which of which, but I was determined that I was going to have my fourth baby. I was going to work through the pregnancy. I was going to keep my practice alive in early postpartum. I probably started working sooner than I would advise any of my clients to. But I had this drive that I was like, we're going to have this baby, but this practice means a lot to me, and I'm going to find a way to keep it going. And I have a supportive partner, so obviously that helps a lot. So when the pandemic hit, I was like, dang it, I am not giving up.
Yeah.
So I feel like I was so driven, like I didn't miss a beat. I was like, oh, okay, we can't see each other in person. We're going to set up this Zoom. We're going to do this. And I kind of just kind of push through, if you will. And I think that pushing through, and many of my colleagues did as well, but that pushing through has sort of made me, I've seen a lot of families virtually, and obviously experience just makes you better at it. So I think that helped. Does that make sense?
It does. And in full disclosure, I feel that I have learned so much from you that it's just shocking to me that you were figuring it out on your own at the same time that I felt I was learning from you. Because, what I experienced when I realized that I'm also pretty darn good at this virtually, even with the breastfeeding stuff, right? Like, of course, you're going to be a million times better than me. But as a midwife, I was really worried about how this would go. And then I started having early successes. And what I realized was, just continuing on with the parallels, it's like what midwives do best at birth is sit on their hands or knit or do something else with their hands. And that's what helping people with breastfeeding virtually was for me, was this moment of reckoning where I realized that in a busy hospital setting, I gave somebody about 3.5 seconds to figure out how to get their baby on the breast. And if they didn't, I just did it for them and I walked out of the room. And I have shed literal tears over the number of people I may have sabotaged in the process. And now I take deep breaths and I use my words. And it has just been so profound. I don't know if you feel a version of that.
100%, because it, especially in the hospital, right? I am really good at latching other people's babies on them, but what does that do for them? Like, what am I really doing? Like, if I'm able to do that, if I can come into a room and help your baby latch and then and I eventually have to walk away, right? I can't stay. So, and when I walk away, like maybe what I did kind of gave you a feel or an idea of what you could do, but it's not nearly as the same as what I do now in a virtual setting. Is I have to be really good at talking about how to move and adjust and get comfortable and ask questions of like, how does that feel now? And what do you think now? And it's just completely changed the way, at least from the perspective of like the latching baby part of my job, it's completely changed the way I do it. And I think in a really positive way, a way that leaves people ending the call knowing how to do what I, guided them through rather than me doing it for them.
Yeah, totally. So, okay, here's a concrete question. And then I actually want to get into a little bit of the semi-technical, if we can, nuts and bolts of how and why this works. But I want to ask you before we do that, are you now an actual fan of virtual care? Or are you still just doing it because it's what we got to do?
I am definitely a fan of virtual care. I definitely am. I've also seen, so I live in Vermont and, it's Vermont, right? It's pretty rural, right? So I have an office in a birth center in Hanover, New Hampshire, which I'm really lucky to have. So I do see some babies in person there when the families want to. But what's so interesting is that I get referred clients from the midwives all the time, but they don't actually live near the birth center either, right? Everyone lives an hour and a half away from everything here. So a lot of them want to see me virtually, even though they could come to Hanover. So it's been so interesting that I think so much of it is geographical as well, that, if you live in a place where it's hard to get to the provider and you have a newborn, that virtual care is so much more convenient. And, some of my favorite clients, I had this lovely client who was like, in the mountains somewhere in Colorado, like an hour and a half from like the next big city. So, I think that it has opened up the idea that we could provide high level expert care. And I know you are a big piece of this, to people that don't necessarily have geographical access.
Yes, that's true. Okay, so now I want to ask a question that is I want you to answer it twice. Once speaking to potential clients and once speaking to healthcare providers who may feel that they need to improve their virtual skills. Can you tell us what someone is looking for in terms of good quality virtual care? Like, what is the difference between in-person and virtual? What are those skills that a consumer needs to be looking out for so that they can say to themselves, I know I'm getting good virtual care? And simultaneously, what are those skills that someone who hasn't felt comfortable in the virtual setting that they could work on to get better or maybe enjoy it more?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for the first question, I think that it's like anything else. I would want to know what the experience of my provider is providing virtual care, right? We're 2 years into virtual care, telehealth being a big part of people's practices. And some providers, moved away from it as fast as they possibly could, right? They moved right back into office, they moved right back into home visits. And it made sense for them. And they'll do a virtual appointment if they have to, but it's not been the most of their practice, right? So I think that I want to know like experience. Sometimes I have people reach out to me that are like, I'd like to work with you, but can you come to my house and wherever? It's usually like nowhere near where I live. And I'll usually say like, I can help you find someone in person if that's what you want. But I also have been providing virtual care to families for almost 2 years now. And I feel really confident in the modality and my ability to help you. So let me know if you want to schedule. So I think that some of it is like anything else, like what is your experience like in this space? And I think it's probably good to know what people's follow-up policy is and how available they are, because one of the beautiful things about virtual care is I get off a call with you, maybe your baby latched during the call and we adjusted things and moved, but then I say, hey, send me some videos, like keep me up to date. Let's see each other again in, a few days or a week. So I think that in some ways, if you're going to really capitalize on virtual care, then I think it makes sense to have it be a much, like I was saying before, a much more of like an ongoing dialogue or conversation rather than like a one and done consult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and for that provider that's maybe wanting to be better at it, but it's not coming natural, are there actual technical, so to speak, skills that you think you've seen yourself shift either in perspective or create something new, or say that old way that I used to do in person doesn't work anymore, so now I do it this way?
Well, I think that, it's a good question. And I have colleagues again on both sides that are like, oh man, if I never have to do a virtual again, I'm happy, and then I have colleagues that are like, yeah, this is cool. I like working in this way. I think that getting really, really confident in talking about how to help someone get comfortable with latch and position. And I think my yoga training has been helpful here, because a big piece of training to be a yoga teacher is cueing, right? It's like helping people be in their body and move their body and providing verbal guidance to do that. And so I feel like that has been helpful. So I think that kind of practice, or thinking through that, maybe even like practicing out loud, like, okay, how could I help someone who's, struggling with this or this verbally without being able to use my hands, And then I think the other thing that I did, kind of two things. One was I've been nursing a baby the entire time that I've been providing virtual care. She's 2 now and she still nurses. And I know that has been helpful to me, because, I get the experience of watching a kid, now a baby at the beginning, nurse many, many times a day. I have lactating breasts, right? So even though I may not be seeing very many people in person, I am sort of, by luck, if you will, of timing, I have been living a lactation nursing journey along with providing virtual care. Obviously, I can't tell people have a baby while you're doing it. That would make it a lot easier. Like I went out and I bought an LV pump because everyone wanted an LV pump. And I was like, I'll just buy one and try it and see what it's like, So I know that has helped me, the timing of that.
I love it. Okay. We will stop short of advising people to give birth in order to become better at their job. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I just think I got lucky.
Okay. Final question on this front, so that we are incredibly clear. What are the situations in which someone needs to see someone in person? So I know that for me, I've kind of decided, and I probably do it on a case-by-case basis rather than like I've written out a list and I say, you fall into this category and you fall into this category. But somewhere in my mind, I know who I've decided needs to see someone in person and who can work with someone virtually. But let's theorize for a minute that everyone starts with a virtual consult, or just about everybody starts with a virtual consult. And even if you were the person who did the virtual, What are the situations in which you say, I need you to see an IBCLC in person, whether that's you or someone else?
Yeah, it's come up maybe 3 times in the last 2 years that I've referred out. And I referred out to somebody that I knew could see them in person. And I think each time it was pretty similar in the sense that the clients were struggling, as some clients will, right? Some babies are going to struggle to nurse well, and some people are going to struggle to make enough milk. And as IBCLCs, we're going to see a larger percentage of those people than in the general population. And the clients each time were expressing concern that if you were just here, Kim, if you could just see what was happening, I think that, you'd really be able to help me get past this. And so in that way, that person is asking for a change in how their care is being delivered. I can't necessarily make that change geographically, but I respect that. I respect the idea that, like, I think I just need someone in my bedroom with me trying to do this. And so each time I have, said, hey, let me help you find someone near you that can come to you. Now, I will say that one time in particular, the client said to me afterwards, okay, she said exactly what you said, and we're in exactly the same place, but it was good for me to hear it from both of you. So, in that way, it's just helpful to have another set of eyes and ears, and in this case, hands on the situation. But I think for me, the biggest thing is that if a client doesn't feel like the care I'm providing is working for them or helping them meet their goals, by all means, let's bring in someone else. I just think that's good practice to refer to even just another IBCLC. And, in that case, all three of those clients were kind of saying, hey, I think I need someone in person. And like, if that's how they learn best, if that's how they're going to process the information best, let's try to make that happen.
So you're saying to view it more as it's time for a second opinion, almost more so than let's differentiate even more firmly between virtual and in person.
Yes, absolutely. And so logistically, the one thing I can't do that, lactation consultants in most parts of the world do is a weighted feed, right? I can't, weigh the baby, nurse the baby, weigh the baby. For some babies, this is important information. But, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, people got really creative. I mean, we were weighing babies on all sorts of kitchen scales and baby scales. And now, if a weighted feed is something that feels important to the care I'm providing, I'll say to the client, can you make an appointment with your pediatrician, and I'll explain to you how to do a weighted feed and let me know how it goes. And by and large, that's mostly possible for people. So I think that's like clinically the one piece that I can't do. I will say, like, almost like using my hands to help latch someone else's baby, which I did for a long time. That weighted feed, I think that maybe because of my kind of nervousness around numbers, I put a lot more weight, pun intended, in that information than I did in other ways of assessing how well a baby was doing with breastfeeding or with gaining, all those things. So I feel like, in a way, not having the ability to have that one critical piece of information has made me develop other ways of helping people kind of say, hey, your baby's getting enough milk or your baby's not getting enough milk, that I didn't, in an in-person visit, I feel like everything was about the weighted feed, like that was like the central focus. That scale was the central focus of the visit, and now I feel like, it's not so much the central focus of the visit. And I think there's some positives for a lot of families with that.
Yeah, but it's because you had this ability to prove it, right? Like, see, look at how much your baby took in. It's so hard to avoid accessing something that we think of as hard evidence. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes, no, I think you're totally right. Yeah.
And I've actually had clients, I think, the weighted feed is a double-edged sword, because I've had clients for whom asking them to go to their pediatrician's office and do one there has soothed them and made their concerns go away about transfer. But in other cases, I've had clients who have started doing excessive amounts of weighted feeds on their own, and I'm advising them to stop doing it, and it becomes a mental health concern.
Absolutely. The whole buying a scale thing was such a big thing, in the beginning of the pandemic. People were buying scales. They didn't know if they're going to even be able to go to their pediatrician for their newborn visits. And for years I said, don't buy a scale. And now I'm like, well, I guess maybe buy a scale, so yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I'm going to move us on, in part because I know we both have hard stops with clients coming up. I want to talk, changing gears from virtual and just wrapping up on a different note. And this is in part because of the way you and I have worked together in a couple of different ways now, right? Like, we share clients on occasion, and I find it so joyous to share clients with Kim. It's so wonderful. But that's one way we've collaborated. And the other way we've collaborated that was really fun is in Thriving After Birth. So for those of you who don't know about that, that's an online course that I developed in conjunction with 8 other specialists. Kim was one of them, and she was a big player in that. She helped develop the lactation part of that course, and I mean, without her, it wouldn't have been the same for sure. But I guess on that note of the way in which you and I have developed a unique relationship and collaboration, I just wanted you to muse broadly for our listeners on what like collaboration in a perfect world looks like to you when it comes to working with a midwife, an OB, a pediatrician, or any other specialist out there, be it we interface a lot with chiropractors and, you know, we didn't open this can of worms and we're not going to now, but like when we talk about tongue tie and all of these things, we interface with other providers. What does perfect world scenario collaboration look like to you?
Well, I think what you and I have been able to do when we are working together with clients is pretty much ideal, but it's really rare because you are a provider that again, wants to be very accessible and available, as am I. So, we're like on three-way, chats with clients, where you're providing midwife perspective, I provide the IBCLC perspective. And like, that's like the clients like getting that. And that is like ideal and so rare. So I think in general, I think just communication is so important. And, there's lots of people, especially from New York and New Jersey that I used to work with a ton, physical therapists, midwives, OBs, especially when I worked at the hospital, getting to work closely with those OBs was really helpful. I think just having respect and sort of understanding of scope of practice. There are many babies that I see that I can help them to a point, and then the appropriate thing to do is to refer them to an expert physical therapist, an expert chiropractor, et cetera. And I think just kind of each provider knowing what their wheelhouse is and what their expertise is, and not feeling like they have to be everything to every client. That sort of the best thing we can do is help build a support network for that client that involves maybe several providers, rather than feeling like we have to have all the answers.
Yeah, and that's basically what I have tried to develop as a virtual clinic where, the midwife is kind of the centerpiece, and the midwife then calls upon the player that is most needed in a given moment, right? So sometimes early postpartum lactation is usually what's up first, right? And then things
Yes.
shift a bit and we move into perhaps mental health. And then I start calling on my peeps who help me with mental health. And then that's, smoothed out hopefully and in motion. And we start to focus more on our physical recovery. Now I'm leaning on my relationships with pelvic floor physical therapists, and so on and so forth, into the end of the spectrum being where infant sleep starts to become a priority for people who are going back to work to busy lives. And maybe I, involve a pediatric sleep coach down the road, right? So it kind of bridges all these gaps, but I stay in touch the entire time. So I love that you're like, your perfect world and my perfect world are the same. That's so super cool. Um, okay. So I know we have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to humor me. I'm still developing this little segment. So for those of you who didn't listen to episode 2, you'll have to go back and check out the end of episode 2 to understand this segment, which I am temporarily calling Shame on You, but it needs a new name. So listeners and Kim, anyone who's on the show can participate in helping me come up with a better name. And Kim, you were very good at that when we were working on the course, so maybe you'll come up with something for me. I think it's inappropriate to continue to call this segment Shame on You, but it's again from my childhood memory of the news thing. I would love it if Kim would share a shame on you from her professional experience.
Okay. So yeah, I was, I don't know what the new name would be, but I'm like, but people can't grow from a place of shame. So we need to find something else. Right. Okay. We'll get there. We'll get there. Right.
We'll get there.
And like the caveat is, I'm not perfect, right? Either. So probably someone could like, find something that I did that was not right either. So it's hard. We're all human, right? And we're all trying to do the best we can. When you asked me about this, I thought, well, as a lactation consultant, like I could probably give you 1,000 examples. And most of them are coming from, either the client's experience in the hospital or early experience with their pediatrician. There are some amazing pediatricians who have done their work on understanding breastfeeding and lactation, and they've done the additional training. And I am so impressed by pediatricians that go that route. And then there are some who took whatever the lactation training was in, in their medical school. And then maybe they breastfed, maybe they didn't, maybe their partner did. I don't know. And like, that's it. That's all the information they got. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most, from a perspective of like, really, is when I have a client go to the pediatrician on day 3. It's almost always day 3, maybe it's day 4, but it's almost always day 3. And their breasts are exploding with milk. Right? Like they are engorged, they are leaking. The baby has dropped weight. We expect babies to drop weight, right, Tanya? We know the baby's going to drop weight. The baby has dropped weight. And no one asks that breastfeeding, lactating person, nobody asks, hey, do you feel like you have more milk than you did this morning? Do you feel like you're leaking through your shirt right now? And instead they say this baby needs to be supplemented with formula. This baby's not gaining enough food. This baby doesn't have enough, to eat. And so I've done so many visits on day 3 with babies who had started supplementing that day with formula. And the parents didn't want to, mind you. If you want to supplement with formula, that's fine. I'm here for whatever you want, but they didn't want to. But they went home with formula and they're supplementing with formula while their breasts are literally pouring milk everywhere. And it's this like strange phenomenon to me where I think that if you just asked, like, hey, I think your baby needs a little more food. Do you feel like there's been a shift for your body? Like, are you making more than you were like literally a few hours ago? I've had people tell me like my milk came in. I felt that transition to my milk while I was waiting in the waiting room at the pediatrician, even if it meant bringing the baby back in a couple of days and doing another weight check, like if clinically that felt good, like just ask the question, because not everyone does have a lot more milk on day 3. And maybe the supplementation is completely appropriate because that person is going to have a delay in their milk transitioning. Fine. But I can't tell you how many consults I've done with that exact scenario where a baby is supplemented unnecessarily when literally the milk is right there. That's my rant.
That's a great story. And it's another one that I think we both just interface with over and over and over again, right? So
Yeah.
Things will be smooth. My client will have come home from the hospital and we're kind of getting into a groove. And then that first pediatrician's appointment is often, unfortunately, a moment of derailment where they come home, their head spins, they heard something very different in messaging than what I'm saying. And we leave people in this position where they now have to decide which person they're going to listen to. And that's so unfair. And so my gut says that the solution to that would be that every pediatrician by law should have an IBCLC in their office. Like, check out the baby, tell the patient and the IBCLC, this baby's lost X% of its body weight, see whether or not you can help her through breastfeeding or if supplementation is in fact necessary. Like if you don't have the time to do it, get somebody who's all in invested in making it happen. And I just don't understand why we don't see this more often.
Yeah. And the other thing is that oftentimes they're leaving with the supplementation plan. And then we'll see you in like a few weeks and they have no idea. Do I keep doing it? I mean, this is like so many of my clients. Do I keep doing it? Do I stop doing it? Like I clearly have tons of milk. Do I put the milk in the freezer and give the baby the formula? Like, how is it? Is the baby spitting up because I'm breastfeeding them, tons of milk and then I'm having them chug formula afterwards? Like, it's like, there's no off ramp to the plan. Like if the plan is a 1 or 2 day plan to get weight up, okay, then make it a 1 or 2 day plan and then, give them instructions on what to do next or refer them to an IBCLC who will do that.
Exactly. All right. Well, we're ending on a soapbox moment, which I guess is where it was meant to go.
I get soapbox on a lot of things, but this one really gets me. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I really thank you for that one because what I really want people to hear is the different perspectives, right? These are the things we see frequently. We don't mean to. This is why I have to change the name from Shame on You, because this isn't about shaming anybody. This is about our listeners hearing the things that we see regularly so that when they encounter it, their little radar goes off and they can come to this experience a little more balanced and with a little bit more information and maybe already have some tools to advocate for themselves to go into a different direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to that communication thing. When you have the ideal of good communication between providers, this is less likely to happen. You won't have to choose who to trust because your providers are communicating. We can kind of like hope for a better world in that way.
Absolutely. Kim, I adore you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
So good to talk with you. I always love talking with you, Tanya, and I love working with you.
Oh, thank you. All right. I'm sure we'll be in touch soon on some 3-way chat.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.